The Ozark Bowl looks like a potential snow globe. What does that mean for Arkansas and Missouri? Let's talk about it on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso, and the central meteorologist of Missouri Tigers football and basketball, well, at least for a little bit today. And we want to start the show here by reminding you that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first ticket purchase. And I want to take a Luther Burden victory lap today, while Luther Burden is going to take his own victory lap on Saturday, it would seem. And how about a college football salary cap? Believe it or not, that's something that has already been tried, ladies and gentlemen. Not as much of a solution as you might think it is. But I do want to start today's program by talking about a strong chance of snow for the Battle Line rivalry on Saturday, or as I like to call it, the Ozark Bowl. But the National Weather Service has snow likely on Saturday, mainly before noon, mostly cloudy, with a high near 31 degrees. Chance of precipitation is 60%. So if you're going to attend the game like I am, not exactly the rosiest of weather forecasts I've ever seen, but at the same time, hey, Missouri's been pretty lucky with weather this season, I'd say. So I'm going to take it, especially since it seems like the participation is going to clear out before the game, which is a really important detail, in my opinion. A lot of Missouri fans and fans of football in general, as soon as they see snow in the forecast, well, they immediately think, oh, this is going to be a run-heavy football game, or at least maybe a little bit more run heavy. And that could definitely be the case for sure. But I will just say that wind, I've said this, if you're an everydayer, you've heard me say it before, as somebody who's done a lot of fantasy football over the years, a lot of wagering, that kind of stuff. I'm just telling you, wind affects passing numbers and passing attempts in particular, much more than just simple precipitation for the most part. Especially if, again, that the snow has already fallen and perhaps it's been cleared on the field to a large extent by the 2:30 p.m. kickoff here this coming Saturday. For example, this is a good example, I think, because it's the most recent example of a snow game in most of our minds. Just this past Thursday, the Steelers and the Browns on Amazon Prime played what was a beautiful snow game, in my opinion. An iconic shot, I thought, with Mike Tomlin's beard collecting that white snow quite beautifully. I thought that was an amazing shot. But in the 24-19 Cleveland over Pittsburgh victory, by the way, those two teams, hey, 24-19, that's about the amount of points you would expect. That's right about your usual total of a Pittsburgh-Cleveland game. If anything, without going back and looking at the archives, I have a feeling that one actually went over the total. But when it comes to the run versus the pass, well, Russell Wilson threw the ball 28 times in that game. His previous four starts, 36, 28, 28, and 29. So he was right there with his usual pass attempts in that snow game. Jameis Winston, on the other hand, for the Browns, did attempt significantly fewer passes. Just 27 versus his previous starts of more than 40 pass attempts in each one. Again, that's significant. I would point out for context, a couple blowout losses there sprinkled in for the Browns, which does indeed lead to more passing attempts. But even against Pittsburgh, it's not as though the Browns didn't throw the ball at all. Just one fewer passing attempts for the Browns than the Steelers in that game. So what makes it more interesting to me, if there is indeed snow on the ground, well, that does offer an opportunity, I think, for more messed up quarterback center exchanges, that type of thing. And as I've said all year, Arkansas is indeed the high variance hogs this season. So what does that mean? Well, it means they're really explosive, and it also means they're prone to penalties and turnovers as well, especially this deep in the season without anything really significant to play for Arkansas. Arkansas sitting at 6-5 has already clinched bowl eligibility. So what are we really doing here for Arkansas? Don't get me wrong. Maybe their players have a ton of pride. They have a strong locker room, and maybe they're getting tired of getting kicked around by the Missouri Tigers the last few seasons. But in an era with so many transfers, I do have to question how much Talon Green, for instance, their starting quarterback, who was at Boise State last season, really cares or is even aware of the Missouri and Arkansas recent history. Is Sam Pittman coming back next season for Arkansas? I think that's very much an open question, and I do think Missouri actually has a chance to maybe snuff out the Sam Pittman era, in Fayetteville, Arkansas. So if that's not another fun thing to play for, I don't know what is. Hey, I don't have anything against Sam Pittman, but I do kind of enjoy the Tigers being coach killers here over recent years. I'm not going to lie. Criticize me for being a sicko if you want, but I'll take it in this particular case. And when it comes to predicting the final score of this game, what I keep coming back to is Missouri, number one, has been a really good home team the last couple of seasons in particular. The game is at Missouri. I think anytime you're traveling for a snow game, maybe subconsciously that makes you a little bit less fired up to play than being at your home base. I don't know, just something about being in your normal routine, sleeping in your bed, that kind of deal. But much more importantly, I just trust Missouri's culture and their motivation. I just trust them to show up for this game much more than I do Arkansas. That's just me. What do you think? I think Missouri's going to win this game, and I think they're going to cover the spread too. And if Missouri is going to win that ball game and cover the 3.5 point spread that they're giving away over at FanDuel Sportsbook, unfortunately, the Tigers are going to have to do it without a veteran receiver, Mookie Cooper, who, according to his Instagram page, yesterday had surgery, and Eli Drinkwitz then later confirmed that day that Mookie did have surgery, and it seems likely that his Missouri career has ended, though I have to admit, in the COVID world here, I got to admit, you never know. I could be wrong there, but it seems like Mookie's career is done at Missouri. He had a lot of really memorable moments at Missouri, a really clutch play that Missouri had to have against Florida last year in particular. I can remember, of course, everybody's going to remember the 4th and 17 by Luther Burden. Mookie Cooper, though, a clutch chain mover, in my opinion, was Mookie Cooper. And to that point, the fact that he, in my opinion, a clutch player in his career for the Tigers, going to go down his last catch as a Tiger, if that is indeed the case, will be against Auburn, that 78-yarder from Brady Cook. I thought one of Brady's absolute best throws of the season. Anticipated Mookie getting open in the middle of the field, and get open he did. Great after the catch effort by Cooper, and a good block downfield by either Weiss or Burden, if I'm remembering correctly as well. Somehow, Cooper did not score a touchdown in his Missouri career, despite being a really productive player, and I just giggle a little bit there because even that 78-yarder, Cooper still tackled somehow inside the 5-yard line, and unfortunately, I do believe that was the play where he did suffer that final injury on his career. So, again, thanks to Mookie Cooper for all the memories and a productive career at Mizzou. Obviously, hope him and everybody else and all these seniors, everybody who's moving on, has a great life left to lead for these young men, obviously. And isn't it wonderful when great minds think alike? I said that I thought Luther Burden III deserved a special honor on Saturday for his great play as a Tiger. Well, it turns out Eli Drinkwitz agrees with me, and he even left open a slight chance that Burden could return next season. Let's talk about all that here in a minute. But first, yes, game time. You got to love basketball, not just college basketball, but I love NBA basketball too, especially in person. Go early, by the way. The warm-ups are almost as fun as the game itself. These guys hardly ever miss a shot, even the big guys. It's astonishing to watch. It really is. But the best place to get NBA tickets, college football, college basketball, heck, concerts, comedy shows, you name it, it's there at Game Time. It's the best place to find your live events. You'll find the easiest way to filter out the fluff. Just click on Game Time Picks, and you'll get exactly the best deals. Stop wasting time and take the guesswork out of buying tickets. With Game Time Picks, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So Eli Drinkwitz told the media that no decisions have been made by Luther Burden when it comes to if he's going to return for his final season at Missouri next season or go to the NFL draft. But Eli continues, quote, I would just say we're very fortunate for Luther to have been here for 3 seasons. He will walk on Saturday. So again, seems like old Eli agreed with me, or maybe he just heard me and said, hey, brilliant idea, son, I'm going with you. No, I'm just kidding, folks. But seriously, on that first part, when it comes to if Luther is gonna come back tonight, Eli leaving the door just slightly ajar there, I gotta say I'm not getting excited about it just yet. As a Missouri fan, as a Luther Burden fan, if he decides to come back next year, fantastic. I'll be thrilled. But at the same time, if I were advising him, if I were his dad or something, I would say, buddy, if I were Eli Drinkwitz, more importantly, let's say, I would say, buddy, thanks for everything. It's time to move on, because there were a lot of Missouri fans who, based on Luther Burden's, output statistically compared to last season, at least the totals, receptions, touchdowns, yards, a lot of Missouri fans were concerned and maybe just saying, hey, is Burden's stock dropping a little bit? At one point I said, maybe back half of the first round instead of the top half. Other than that, I can't see a whole lot of production, or at least production droppage in terms of fantasy stats, sure. But production in terms of being a difference-making player, I haven't seen any dip this season. If anything, Burden has made tremendous clutch plays for Missouri when they need it, time and time again, against South Carolina, against Oklahoma, various other moments that are washing over my head, I'm sure, too, because he truly has been that good. But the point is, I just think we've seen the end of it for Luther Burden. I just think the risk outweighs the reward. The reward being, obviously more money at the NFL level in an NIL world. Obviously that calculation has changed a little bit, but for somebody who is an elite of a player as Burden, somebody who has a real good chance to go in the top 15, maybe even the top 10 potentially, I just don't see how you can kiss that type of money goodbye when if you understand the vagaries of how the NFL salary cap and all that structure works, basically you can get to that second contract, the after rookie contract, more quickly the more quickly you get into the league. So that's a big financial incentive for Burden as well. Of course, there's always the injury thing, but that's mitigated somewhat in many ways in 2024. Number one, because of insurance. Almost all these big-time players will take out insurance on themselves these days, and in the event of a career and earnings potential altering injury. But secondly, those type of injuries just are a lot more rare than they used to be too, to be quite honest. That's a good thing, obviously. It's a good thing for football, for medicine, and for all of us who benefit from these types of advances because people love football so much. A nice secondary effect of our love of sports that people don't think about too often. But I have to say, I'm happy that Missouri is allowing Luther Burden to take a victory lap, to embrace the crowd, embrace his family, all that good stuff, as if he were a senior, because I think he deserves that moment. And it is sort of subjective as to who you give that to. I understand you can say this is a slippery slope. It opens up Pandora's box, whatever cliche you want to use here. But I don't know. To me, in this case, it's obvious that Burden deserves it. So good for him, and I'll be one of the people in there cheering as loud as I possibly can for him and Brady Cook and Mookie Cooper and Johnny Walker and everybody else. So the thing is, I was talking earlier about this, about how NIL has changed the calculation a little bit for a lot of these guys in terms of, hey, I'll stick around for another year instead of going to the NBA, especially if I'm a borderline prospect, or the NFL, especially if I'm a 4th or 5th rounder projected. Well, if you're a first rounder like Burden, that's a totally different deal. But when it comes to NIL, listener Zach has a good point that I've been kind of waiting for the bubble to pop at a certain point. He says most of these teams will regret paying players these millions they never even have seen play. Well, a slight correction there. The teams really aren't paying these guys, at least not directly. Now, I'm sure the teams are telling their NIL infrastructure, donors, that type of deal, like, hey, here's who we like. Obviously, they're not just grasping around for straws in the dark, that type of deal. They're definitely getting guidance from the programs themselves. But what I'm saying is, what I think is people like Dave Portnoy, who I brought up yesterday, the Michigan backers, Larry Ellison, that type of deal. At a certain point, you're paying these millions of dollars. If you have a few 7-5 seasons in a row, at a certain point, you start questioning, now, wait a second, what am I getting for my money here? It's one thing if you're winning national championships and getting all the glory that bestows upon you, but some people are impatient. Some people are much more impatient than others. Let's put it that way. And while some millionaires and billionaires have made their money by being patient, others have made it by being quite the opposite, by being people who make stuff happen and almost force it with the will of their personalities. So it'll just be interesting to see how all of that plays out. Now, my last episode, I was talking about, hey, who are Missouri's billionaires? How are we going to compete with the Ellisons and Portnoys of the world? Well, this caused the usual suspects who would like to see a college football and basketball salary cap system put into place to start commenting on my page. And I will just say there are some pluses and minuses to that system, to be sure. I would just point out that, in essence, college football and basketball already had a salary cap. It was called the previous system. It was the scholarship system. When the system says, hey, you've got 85 scholarships, here's what those scholarships cover. It can't cover meals. It can't cover this. It can't cover that. That's exactly what that is. That is a salary cap for all intents and purposes. And what we saw is, for decades under that system, well, most of the same 10 teams or so, let's say, maybe 10 to 15, whatever you want to call the true blue bloods of college football, we all know exactly what teams we're talking about here. Well, those are the teams that won all of the championships, basically. Sure, 30 years ago, Colorado won one, and 35, 40 years ago, BYU won one. But for the most part, it's been Florida State and Alabama and Oklahoma and Miami and those types of teams who have dominated college football. Now, occasionally Nebraska and Miami, those types of teams will fall out, and maybe a Clemson will come back up. But as George Carlin used to say, it's a big club and you're not in it. The point is, we've actually seen a little bit more parity in this new NIL era and the portal era. So for all of its flaws, and it definitely does have its flaws, well, if your goal is parity and to give the little guys, as it were, more of a chance, I would argue that this system so far has been better than the scholarship system, which you could easily say was just a salary cap system. And coming up, I want to bounce off more of your emails and comments, including my slight hesitation to go all in on this year's Missouri basketball team, despite some obvious improvements. But also, you know what? I think FanDuel Sportsbook agrees with me on my snow take. It would seem Missouri and Arkansas, the total 54.5. That seems like about what it would be regardless of the weather forecast to me. But regardless, you got to get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets. If you win, the FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch during the game, you can check out the latest stats, view the play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And everyday listener Ross says, as a season ticket holder for basketball, I think this team is much better. Hot take, but just as good as the 22-23 team. Our bench is so solid with the freshmen and Grill/Warwick. It's been a lot of fun watching this team in person. Gates seems revitalized too. Very proud of them so far. And I have to agree, so far the returns have been very encouraging, Ross. I'm not quite ready to go to, hey, this is as good as the 22-23 team yet. I'm personally going to need to see a little bit more than that, although I have to say I do understand your optimism. I really do. I could be underselling this team. And if the Tigers continue their dominant ways against lesser competition, if Missouri blows out Lindenwood tonight, on $2.99 beer night, by the way, then I will be impressed. But I will say, coming up, the Cal and Kansas games here, well, that's when the real season begins. I think those two teams, those two games in particular, are going to tell us a lot. And on Dennis Gates and those unconventional rotations, there are certainly some upsides to it. It just, again, this is part of what makes me hesitate, the unconventional nature of this team so far. I think speaking of that 22-23 squad, that last Missouri NCAA tournament team in Gates' first season, I think the lesson that Coach Gates learned from that season is, you know what, I ran out of guys at the end of that year. When Trey Gomillion got hurt, boy, that really tested the depth of Missouri, and I think just having to rely on such a relatively small group of guys, well, yeah, that team had great chemistry. They played great offense together, but they may have gotten a little bit worn down as the season went along too, especially those front court players having to carry so much of the load on the glass and all that kind of stuff. So I think really, I just think that, again, I think his lesson was that, hey, I ran out of too many guys, not really that the chemistry was wrong last season or anything like that. And speaking of last season, you may have noticed how John Tonje is playing really good ball for Wisconsin right now with the way Grill is playing this season. Obviously, having those two guys fully healthy last season for the Tigers would have made a significant difference. How much is kind of the question. A few wins in the SEC, no doubt about that. I don't think it would have been an NCAA tournament team or anything like that. I think that team had some fundamental problems that would have ultimately held it back. But as for this season, this is a little bit of a different Dennis Gates type team in that it doesn't seem offensively that they're built around the three-pointer as much. Now, obviously, Caleb Grill's going to put them up. Tamar Bates is going to put him up. Jacob Cruz, Marquez Warwick to a slightly lesser extent. I think of Warwick more as a shooter at least, or excuse me, as a scorer more than a shooter at this point. But I think Missouri, with so much more size and athleticism than they've had in Gates' first two seasons, I think they can lean on that and use, again, the good thing about this deep roster here, if the guys all buy into it, you do have some upside here. For example, Josh Gray, a guy who is as big of a player as you're going to find in the conference this season. When you need him, he can be a real asset. But just based on who's on the court for the other team, there may be times when you want to take him off the court. Put Mark Mitchell in at the 5, or just a different Aiden Shaw, a different type of player in the middle who can maybe play a little bit more perimeter defense, that type of thing. The point is, if these young guys can all buy into this, if the freshmen are okay with not getting any minutes, and looking towards the future for a few games in a row, all that kind of stuff, if the guys can buy into this, then the malleability of this Missouri roster could be really dangerous. And by the way, in case you missed it, the Tigers' lone loss to start the season, of course, was against Memphis. Well, the Memphis Tigers took down the defending national champions, UConn, who, by the way, then also lost, UConn did, to Colorado as well. So the initial response was, hey, Memphis beat UConn. Maybe this is good for the Tigers. Now I'm starting to wonder, wait, maybe UConn just isn't as good as they've been the last few seasons. We'll have a better idea of that, of course, at the end of the season. But just interesting notes I thought to go out on with Mizzou basketball. Thanks for making this show your first listen. As always, for your second listen, check out the Locked On SEC show. Just taped the squad yesterday, and it's going to run tonight. That's right, Wednesday evening, really, probably about 4 p.m. or so. So that's going to drop here in just a few hours, a little early for the Thanksgiving holiday. So enjoy that. I took a pot shot at Kansas early in the program that nearly derailed that first segment. We got it back on the tracks. But regardless, enjoy the squad. Enjoy your Thanksgiving. Put down your phones and actually talk to your relatives, kids. Oh, and so until next time, I am John Miller, and this has been Locked on Mizzou.